I've been on a mission to turn this coin into a watch, and in today's episode, I make a huge mistake. I also realized just why it's been taking me so long to make this watch and why it's so difficult. And I realized that in order for me to succeed, I'm gonna have to learn something new. I'm gonna be learning the Japanese art of Mokume Gane, and in true fashion, I'm gonna be making it from coins. But first, it's time to resume from where we left off. This is part 3 of the series, and if you haven't watched the first 2 parts, I'd suggest you go and do so. It's gonna make your life a lot less confusing. I'm refining the case a bit more, just to make sure it's as elegant as possible, and then I'm gonna cut some threads into the back of this case, to make sure that the case back can thread into it. Here you can see the final shape of the case, and I'm gonna do a preliminary finish of the case to make sure that there aren't any issues. Foreshadowing right there. Looking at the bezel, I realized when I made this that I made the hole for the crystal slightly too big, about 0.1 or 0.2 millimeters, and so I'm hammering the sides of the bezel to bring the material a bit more inwards so that I can grind the perfect fit for the crystal. The steel bit is going to be the dial markers. I'm going to give it a nice brushed finish and engrave the markers on it. Not quite sure what exactly I'm gonna engrave, but I'm gonna engrave it. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps out a lot. Thank you. After polishing up the bezel, I'm looking at the case back. And since I've got the perfect case back with the perfect thickness, threads, and shape, I'm gonna finish it and make sure that it fits inside the watch. But it's at this point, when I was finally gaining some traction and finally feeling like I was going somewhere, that I saw some of the big issues with this case. It was sort of the beginning of the end, and I don't know how I didn't see this sooner, but it was kind of a big deal. Uh-oh. That looks very visible. I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but there's a crack over here. I noticed it I'm not sure if I showed it in the previous episode, but I noticed this a few minutes ago, and I thought it was fine. So I filled it with some silver solder, but now I realize that this alloy is different from this alloy, and now it's very much visible on the side. So I think what I'm gonna have to do is figure out a way to fill that, but yeah, this is really bad. This is probably going to... I don't know what to do. I just noticed this as well. There's a crack over here. I've tried to fill it and it's visible. But there's also a huge bit of porosity over here. And I've only noticed it now after I finished because I was busy. I had a rough surface finish, so you couldn't really notice it, but here you can see there's a whole bunch of deep, very fine porosities, and they're full of oxidation, which is basically going to have to be fully ground out and then reapplied or rewelded. But I don't have any solder that matches this alloy because it's a new alloy. Yeah, 3 weeks. Yeah, look at that. Never mind. The more I look at this, the more I realize that this is really bad. I've gouged out a bit here and it's quite deep, but it's actually not just a gap, it's a crack in the metal. Not sure how this happened. Maybe there was a piece of debris inside the mold, or oh no, they didn't even use them more, so I don't actually know what's going on. But there as well, I don't know what to do about this. Yeah, this may be a failure. I may have to restart. I think there's only one thing I can do. And on that disappointment, it's time to start all over again. This time though, I'm going to take a different approach to the project, and I'm still going to use 1 Rand coins, but I'll also be using 5 cent coins. The reason is because these 5 cent coins are made from nickel, and modern day 1 Rand coins are entirely copper with a nickel plated jacket on the outside. The idea is that I'm going to stack these after cleaning them thoroughly into a nice billet of copper and nickel that alternates between the two. I'm going to get it extremely hot so that they forge well together and make one cohesive piece. This alternating pattern of nickel and copper is known as Mokume Gane, and it's a Japanese art, and it's done in a very similar fashion, except it's using regular pieces of copper or nickel, and it also uses precious metals like silver and gold, brass as well, and a couple of other materials, and there's a wide variety of patterns and styles and materials that it's made from. I figured to just jump straight into it, and on this first attempt, I was just being dumb. I didn't get this material hot enough. I was also using it on two giant pieces of steel, which act as heat sinks, which remove the heat from the coins, and I didn't even put any pressure on to clamp it down. Honestly, it was just sort of wishful thinking. So the second attempt, it's gonna be a lot better than this failure. Here I've had the coins tied together tightly. I'm gonna forge weld it at a much higher temperature, and even though in the first attempt I got it quite hot, I want this so hot that it almost melts. As you can see, I've got it hot and I've clamped it together, although this didn't really forge weld the coins together. But it's so stuck enough that I could clamp it in another clamp and get it extremely hot, and then it forged well together. So here you can see I've got it dangling in sort of like a suspension jig, and I've got it to the point where the copper and the nickel starts to slightly melt and fuse together in this shot you can see here. I made quite a few of these pieces, and the idea is that I'm going to make multiple of these, stack them together in a specific pattern so that you can see the different copper and nickel layers. Before I can do that though, I've got to get these to roughly the same height, so I'm heating it up to a nice cherry red temperature, hammering it to where it's almost completely flat, so that each of these layers or each of these pieces make the same number of layers. I went ahead and ground out two flat sides on these, and you can finally start seeing the pattern of the copper and nickel layers. Not sure how well you can see it on camera here, but once I sand this and finish this, you can see that it has quite an interesting pattern to it. Here you can see the pattern a lot better, and you can see the alternating copper and nickel layers. I'm going to make 3 more of these, or 2 more of these to make 3, and I'm going to stack them in this pattern so that the layers run horizontally like a billet of Damascus steel. Then I'm going to get this red hot and fusion them together, and in the next episode I'm going to start manipulating and changing this to have a really interesting pattern, and from that material I'll be making a watch case and a watch bezel. That'll be in part 4 of this, so don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.